of outreach for the Alternative Protein Project. I'm also joined today by 3 other facilitators, my co-director of outreach, Haywan, as well as the hosts, Brittany and Sam. We are so honored and humbled to have been joined by Esther and Nate today. This event is organized by the Berkeley Alternative Protein Project, a student-run organization supported by the Good Food Institute that strives to build a healthy, sustainable, and just food system by creating a vibrant and robust community for alternative protein research and innovation. Here is the overview of the event today. We will be having our panel discussion from 8:15 to 8:45, and throughout the panel, feel free to message any questions. Afterwards, we will spend the time from 8:45 to 9 for any of the audience members to personally ask any questions, as well as fulfill questions from all of you that we were not able to get to during the panel. Towards the end of the panel, we will wrap everything up for tonight, and each speaker will be able to make some concluding remarks. For now, we will be having Brittany and Sam introduce the speakers and leading the panel discussion.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Brittany. I'm from the Outreach Committee, and it's my pleasure to introduce Esther Park. She's a nutrition and health senior scientist at Impossible Foods. And Esther, I was wondering if you could give a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm Esther Park. As the slide says, I'm a senior scientist on the nutrition and health team at Impossible Foods. I'm also a registered dietitian, and I'll talk a little bit about my career trajectory during the panel. But yeah, I kind of bring a nutrition lens to the team at Impossible.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam from Outreach Committee. Our other guest that we are so excited about is Nate. Nate, would you also tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you all for inviting me, and I'm so glad to be here with you. I'm the startup growth specialist at the Good Food Institute, which is a nonprofit that exists to accelerate the alt protein industry, and has the pleasure of working with you all through a couple of my colleagues primarily. I help lead GFI's startup incubator and venture capital support programs through things like our state of the industry reports or one-on-one support, those kinds of things.
Great, thank you.
So I'll jump into the first question, which is for Esther. What's the biggest piece of misinformation concerning the nutrition and health of alt protein products that you'd like to dispel?
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute. Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are kind of a lot of pieces of misinformation out there, but I think one that is particularly big right now is just the idea that alternative protein products are, ultra processed and therefore should be considered unhealthy and should be avoided. So this is something that we see really commonly in popular media and among nutrition messaging that's aimed towards lay audiences. And it really originates from kind of a history of many processed foods being mass produced pretty cheaply and without concern for human health. And then, the subsequent publicity that has historically occurred when the health consequences of these foods are later revealed has led to just an overall distrust of food technology. But the thing is, in reality, most foods that we eat involve processing. And, there are numerous benefits to applying technology to foods. Some examples include, the ability to concentrate desired nutrients, destroying harmful phytochemicals, and importantly, improving microbial safety, as in the example of, say, pasteurized milk. So you can see the issue isn't the processing itself, but is instead the commitment to responsible processing. So focusing on quality of ingredients versus the number, I think, is really important. And at Impossible Foods, we really encourage consumers to look at the facts rather than focusing on these buzzwords. And one kind of note to illustrate just how widespread processing is in the food industry. Beef itself is arguably a highly processed food, even though it's often promoted by advocates as like an all-natural product that only contains one ingredient. So in actuality, it's a little known fact, but ground beef actually often contains, it's a safe but highly processed ingredient called lean finely textured beef, or LFTB. And this LFTB, it's approved by the FDA. It's permitted to be present in ground beef at up to 15% without needing to be declared on the label. and that's why people haven't really heard about it, even though the beef industry, you know, it's not something that they hide. They have spoken publicly about its use. But basically what this is, the beef industry, they'll take trimmings from what would otherwise go to waste and use food processing equipment to separate the lean meat from the fat and incorporate that all into the final product. They also use processing aids, things like ammonium hydroxide or citric acid to help kill the bacteria, and this creates a highly safe product. So this use of LFTB, it really reduces food waste by using as much of the animal carcass as possible. So you can see that, you know, food processing can be and is used for beneficial purposes by many in the food industry. And then I think a last concluding point about this is that we really need to look at the bigger picture when it comes to food security and the sustainability of our food supply. So using the Impossible Burger as an example, you know, our product contains a really carefully considered mixture of ingredients that can replicate the desirable attributes of ground beef at a fraction of the environmental cost. So if we were trying to minimize processing, say, and so we simply assembled the whole food equivalents of our key processed ingredients. So if we took whole soybeans instead of using soy protein concentrate, and then mashed that together with some sunflower seeds and coconut flesh instead of you know, the respective oils, we'd end up with a product that is nothing like beef and is also not necessarily any healthier. And you know, this product wouldn't stand a chance of convincing meat eaters to substitute our product for their usual hamburger, which is, you know, a change that has major positive implications for climate change, as well as our ability to sustainably feed a growing world population. So again, just kind of looking at the big picture rather than getting hung up on buzzwords.
Thank you for your answer. That was great. And the next question for both of you is that how do you think the growth of alternative protein will change our society? Nate, could you share your thoughts first?
Yeah, sure. I think one major thing to outline is that there will be major bankruptcies in the animal agriculture industry a lot sooner than we think. This was highlighted very effectively by a think tank called Rethink X in a report called Transforming Agriculture. And the general idea is that animal agriculture, so that's, you know, the production of meat, but also dairy, leathers, etc., relies on very thin margins, just-in-time supply chains, and other vulnerabilities like outdated production methods, things like that, right? And when you start to cut into those margins, either through supply chain disruptions like pandemics, or even more so through the substitution effect, so people switching from animal-based dairy to plant-based dairies, that reduces a major income stream for these kind of interconnected industries. So for example, about 10% of the value of a dairy cow is the value of the animal's flesh after it dies, and they create meat or pet food from it. You know, this is called the carcass balancing problem. Another large percentage of the value is the skin from the cow, the collagen from the bones. But you know, now we have these technologies that can create the you know, artificial leathers or you know, plant-based leathers, cultivated leathers, you know, gel tours creating collagens. Tremendous amount of success we've seen with dairies of all sorts, and now we're finally seeing it with meat, really kind of cutting into the margins there. So you might have seen that like the largest dairy producer in America went bankrupt in the last couple of years. Dairy's having a really hard time. I would imagine that meat is going to be kind of in a similar situation in a couple of years or in a few years here.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I don't know if I should be sad for a company going bankrupt, but to be honest, I'm a little bit happy. Sorry, guys. But yes, Esther, can you please share your thoughts? Thank you, Nate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nate. That was really interesting to just think about kind of the economic ramifications. I thought about this question more in terms of kind of like consumer perceptions and things like that. And I think in many ways, the change that I would have foreseen is already happening. You know, Impossible Foods, Beyond, Light Life, these are all kind of brands that were some of the early pioneers in the space, but you know, now there's many, many others. And plant-based meat is no longer a foreign concept to people. And that's kind of the aim, is to show consumers that that it is possible to have an alternative to animal meat that is realistic and you know, desirable. And I definitely see a lot of benefits to this change. Obviously, environmentally, you know, our company conducted a life cycle assessment in 2019 with a sustainability consulting group called Qantas. And they found that compared to a beef hamburger, an Impossible Burger takes 96% less land, 87% less water to produce, and contributes 89% less greenhouse gas emissions, which are staggering statistics. So I think, you know, obviously the environmental benefits are clear. But then also in terms of public health, I think, you know, the growth of alternative protein allows for us to use food technology as a means to improving the health of humans. So we can responsibly create products that, you know, replicate the nutritional benefits of animal meat, but as a plus, we can also improve upon animal meat in order to address issues of public health concern. So as a dietitian, I'm particularly excited about this prospect of the food industry just taking more of a responsibility in the health of the human population. And I really do see this being a shift that can be made possible through the growth of not only alternative protein, but just other food technologies in general as a presence in our food system.
Thank
Exactly.
you, Esther. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Brittany, please.
I was just gonna say, I could not agree more. So our next question is also for both of you. Maybe Esther, if you don't mind sharing first. Can you describe what your journey has been like to your current position that you're in?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey begins in high school, where a number of different factors just kind of sparked an interest in nutrition. But I think, you know, initially I was really interested in kind of diet planning and wanted to be able to help people sort of on a one-on-one basis. So I went to school, I went to Cornell as an undergrad and studied nutritional sciences, went through the whole dietetics track. And then after college, I did my internship at a dietetic internship at Mount Auburn Hospital in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I'm from. And my internship was really focused on clinical nutrition, which, you know, for those not in the dietetics world, clinical nutrition generally focuses on providing nutrition guidance in the context of health conditions. So generally, these kind of dietitians work in settings like hospitals and clinics, where they work one-on-one with people to help them meet specific nutrition goals. So after the internship, I got my license as a registered dietitian, or RD, and worked in a couple of different kind of clinical roles. So I worked for the Women, Infants, and Children program, or the WIC program, which provides nutrition education for low-income women and families. And then I worked for 3 years in a long-term acute care hospital, where I was in charge of the cardiopulmonary unit and provided nutrition education to individual patients and their families. So while I really enjoyed this, because this is kind of what I had always wanted to do, was to work with people one-on-one, I found myself really kind of frustrated at the fact that my impact was so limited at that level. You know, I could educate my patients and clients all day, but in reality, patient and client knowledge about nutrition is just one tiny, tiny piece of the puzzle when it comes to changing dietary habits and improving health. So I became really aware that we live in a food system that makes it just so hard to follow recommendations in terms of nutrition, and that our dietary patterns can really become ingrained in us to the point where it's just extremely challenging to make sustainable changes. So realizing that I still had a lot to learn about these various systemic factors influencing our nutrition, I decided to go back to school to study public health. And that's what brought me out to California. So I did my MPH at Cal in public health nutrition. And I really got to learn how to think about nutrition from a systems perspective. And in the program, there's a huge focus on the social ecological model, which posits that individual behaviors like dietary behaviors are due not only to like individual like preferences or knowledge, or things like that, but they're also influenced by increasingly external factors. So things like our social networks, the food and beverage environment where we live, and the policies that determine how the food system operates. So after I graduated, I was thinking about, you know, next steps in my career, and I think in the past, I probably would have shied away from a career in the food industry. Just in my mind, I kind of still had those negative associations with food companies as, being giant evil corporations. But as I thought about it and I thought about, what I had learned in grad school, I realized that food companies are absolutely critical in determining the food landscape and therefore the health consequences of the public. So rather than, distancing myself from the food industry, I thought, why not work within it? So I searched around for food companies that had missions that I could align with, and that's how I ended up at Impossible.
That's so awesome. Thank you for sharing. Then Nate.
Yeah, that's a great story. I'll also start in high school then. So I grew up in Kansas and decided to attend the University of Kansas in a joint bachelor's in economics and law degree program. And so, Zoom 6 years in the future, I'm, in my finishing up law school, thinking about potentially going the corporate route, was thinking about working at a large corporate law firm, and decided that really what I was passionate about, that I got to explore through a few internships and that kind of thing, was biotech, and then personally interested in animal welfare as kind of a cause area. And so I worked in biotech for a little bit of time at a university affiliated biotech incubator. So I would, consult with professors, help them start companies, do research for them, do that kind of work. But then realized I could work in alternative proteins, and I could, work with biotech entrepreneurs to save animals. So that's really what drove me into this space. And yeah, that was maybe about 15 or 16 months ago, and I've been working at GFI since.
Thank you again. An amazing journey you guys took to be where you are now. So for both, can you describe what a typical workday looks like for you? And are there any differences due to COVID? Nate, could you please share your thoughts first?
Yes. To answer the second part first, GFI is about COVID. GFI has always been a remote organization, so we work from home. So things haven't changed all too much, other than we're not doing, going to give presentations anymore. We're doing a lot of Zoom webinars, which saves a lot of travel time. And let's see, in terms of my typical day to day, there's a lot of consultations with my main audiences. So either email correspondence or meetings with venture capitalists who are exploring the space, or an entrepreneur who wants help with fundraising strategy or go-to-market strategy. A lot of time spent giving presentations at various events. And then probably the main thing I spend my time on, or at least try to spend as much time as possible, is on deep projects. So things like our state of the industry reports, which kind of provide a review of everything that's happening in cultivated meat, fermentation, and then plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. Doing things like analyzing white space opportunities through expert interviews that we can then hopefully find companies to create businesses around, maintaining, databases of vendors and things like that is my typical day-to-day.
It's very interesting, especially I know a few groups here would want to have their own startup in the plant-based industry one day. So they might contact you, I think. Esther, would you please share your thoughts?
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, typical workday. The short answer is that there's no typical day. It's always a little different, but I can kind of categorize the type of work I do into different buckets. So I think the first is a little bit more internal. So working with the R&D team on formulations. So our team works really closely with the R&D on just different prototypes and products to ensure that these formulations are aligned with our nutrition and health goals. And we're also involved kind of from the start. So we help to set the nutrition goals from the get-go, which is good. And then in terms of ingredients, we review all ingredients that come through the pipeline for alignment, again, with nutrition, health, and safety goals. So that's a huge project because our R&D team is constantly experimenting with new ingredients and we have to review all of them. So that keeps us pretty busy. And then kind of moving away from the internal bucket and then focusing more on more external type work. So in terms of communications, we work with our customer advocacy team that's kind of like customer service on helping to answer any questions that we get that have to do with nutrition and health that don't have kind of a standard response. We'll help out with that. We also work with our communications team to help provide content for any sort of nutrition and health related messaging. And then a third kind of bucket that encompasses everything is research. So our team devotes a lot of time to doing research in terms of staying on top of literature. So reading a lot of papers, trying to stay on top of the latest in science, as well as in trends in nutrition and health, because we want to know what our customers are reading about and care about, things like that. And we'll conduct our own, experimental research as well. Nothing super official, but we'll do a lot of kitchen experiments just to help us understand our product better in terms of its nutrition and health. So yeah, that's kind of a snapshot of the different types of things we do. And there's a million other little things in between, but that's an overview. And then in terms of how COVID has affected our work, so for Impossible Foods, obviously safety is priority. So we do have some employees that have to be in person in order to do their work. So people who work in the lab, people who work at the manufacturing plants, things like that. So if it's essential, people are able to go into the office or lab or plant. And there's of course strict protocols in place for safety. But then for the rest of us, we're able to do our work from home. So I have been remote for 10 months now. And yeah, it's actually been a pretty painless transition. Thank goodness for technology and Zoom and all of the things. So yeah, it hasn't been painful at all, but yeah, that's how it's affected my work.
Thank you both for sharing. I think that a lot of us obviously want to go into this industry in some way. Also, Nate, we really like those industry reports. So thank you. So the next question is also for both of you. Maybe Esther, you could go first for this one. So what are your thoughts about the recent influx of alt protein in fast food chains?
Oops, sorry, fiddling around with my mute button. Yeah, so I think that this is an interesting question. I think, it may seem a little bit strange that as a dietitian, I would be working at a company that partners with fast food companies, which have historically been known to be a factor in pretty negative public health outcomes. But the reality is that fast food is what is available and accessible to the vast majority of people in the country and around the world. So just to give some statistics, according to a CDC analysis of some data from NHANES, that's the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey that is done every year. It's comprehensive and nationwide. Over a third, so 36.3% of US children consume fast food on any given day during 2015 to 2018, and similar statistics for adults as well as 36.6%. And the quick service restaurant industry or fast food industry makes it really easy to do so, with almost 200,000 fast food restaurant businesses in the US this year, according to some industry research. So from a food access standpoint, I'm actually pretty excited about the idea that I can help to work to improve the quality of the foods made available through these types of establishments that serve so many people. And again, it's kind of this idea of working within rather than against the system in order to create positive changes. That being said, from a nutrition perspective, there's still a long way to go in terms of making fast food healthier. But I think that providing an alternative for consumers in a place where they can actually easily access the food is a huge first step. We can't solve public health issues by providing alternatives only in these niche marketplaces, because that will only serve to further widen health disparities that exist.
Yeah, agree with all of that. And also just shout out to Impossible Foods for being an absolute pioneer in the strategy of scaling through food service. I think that as Esther mentioned, people make their food choices on the basis of taste, price, and convenience, and that is the trifecta that fast food has perfected. And if you want to create products that have mainstream appeal, you need to get people to try those products and see if they like them. And the great thing about fast food is it really reduces the barrier to trying those products. It's, a few dollars versus, buying all the ingredients and doing it yourself. Also, fast food allows you to have a more controlled experience. So it's prepared and it, in a set way by professionals rather than people at home, which is beneficial, at least like in the early days of the industry where the products weren't as maybe versatile or is easy to cook at home. It is also really valuable because your margins are good in food service. At least you can charge a little bit more. People aren't comparing it right next to, say, the animal-based ground beef and see that it's a little bit more to buy the plant-based. So I think it's great. It also helps position plant-based food as non-elitist. So we want to have mainstream appeal. It's awesome that it's all available in Whole Foods and that Whole Foods is the best place to buy a lot of this stuff. But the majority of Americans go to McDonald's, they don't go to Whole Foods. So that's really where it's really important to have impact. Yeah, and it's really, I mean, that's been kind of the bastion of this alt protein boom has been food service. And yeah, obviously they're not perfect, but they're at least trying to be better, and hopefully those products continue to sell well, and we get launches at all the major chains.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was just like reading an article like a few weeks ago about McDonald's opening up their own factory for launching their plant-based food. Like it was so interesting. I was like, wow, like the world is really changing. But I'm also craving some fast food right now, especially it sounds good in a dead week. But thank you guys for your answers. Our next question is for both of you, how much of a priority is health and nutrition in alternative protein and is attracting consumers? Esther, if you please go first.
Sure thing. Yeah, so nutrition and health in terms of how much of a priority is it? Well, for our company, it's an integral part of our mission. The environmental goals of our company have been made pretty clear, but we also have a commitment to protecting and improving human health because we recognize and embrace that human health is vitally interconnected with planetary health. In order to ensure that alternative proteins are a sustainable way to mitigate environmental harm to the planet, we also need to make sure they benefit the humans who will be inhabiting that planet, both in scope by ensuring we can feed the growing population, and in quality by ensuring that the food is an asset to our health. But in terms of attracting consumers, taste is still the #1 driver for our consumers. But that being said, nutrition and health is one of the top priorities for many, especially in this day and age when we have access to just so much information about health, and people are hearing so many messages about nutrition through the media and other channels. So it's definitely up there. Taste is just the #1.
Yeah, not too much to add other than just pointing out that the main audience for alternative proteins is this demographic group or psychographic group called flexitarians. So it's people who do eat animal-based meat, but are switching to or trying to reduce their animal meat consumption and often switching to plant-based products at least some of the time as a way to improve their personal health for the most part. It depends where you are. In the US, for my understanding is that personal health is the main driver behind plant-based purchasing. But if you go to markets like Germany, it might be environmental or sustainability reasons. So, it's just going to depend where you are. But an interesting stat from Beyond Meat, and it's probably similar for Impossible, 93% of the people in the grocery stores buying their products also buy animal meat products in the same trip, I think is the correct statistics there. So it just shows that, it's not really veganism or vegetarianism that are the key drivers. It's the interest in trying these new products because they're hearing that they taste great and also that they can be better for them. And there's also just a growing understanding of the environmental, I think, benefits, although I think that's pretty far below just the personal health and taste aspects.
Yeah, I definitely have seen that in just my friends and family. They will purchase both at the grocery store and tell me quite excitingly, like, "Oh, I got Beyond or Impossible." By the way, any questions that are coming in through the chat, we'll ask those at the end. So the next question's for Esther. What specific challenges do you think companies face in making alt protein healthy without compromising the taste?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you've kind of stated the big challenge within the question, because it is a challenge to deliver on taste, which again is the #1 factor in attracting consumers, while matching or improving upon the animal meats that we're trying to replace in terms of nutritional quality. So I think, I mean, one major way in which Impossible Foods has met this challenge, and I don't know how familiar people are with our processes, but what we have done is we have discovered what it is that makes meat taste like meat. So our scientists found that heme from hemoglobin, iron-containing molecule that's found in animals, plants, all over. But they found that the heme from hemoglobin is what really gives meat its characteristic meaty flavor and aroma. And then we were able to find a plant source using soy, like hemoglobin. So like hemoglobin is just hemoglobin that's from legumes. So we found that in soy root nodules. And then we found a way to scalably produce this like hemoglobin using fermentation methods. So the use of natural food chemistry and kind of these innovative technologies has been the solution to the challenge of creating these nutritious food products that don't compromise the taste. But in terms of other kind of operational challenges, I think because we are creating products that are comprised of a variety of ingredients, you know, we still have a lot more ingredients than beef. We need to make sure that the other flavor ingredients we use are not only individually aligned with our nutrition goals, but also that the entire mix of flavor ingredients and the overall final product remain aligned with these goals as well. And then there's also, of course, all the other restraints that factor into ingredient choices. So things like sourcing and scalability and cost, those things all need to be considered. So yeah, just ingredient selection is just a complex process, but it is a challenge that we have found to not be insurmountable. I think there are other kind of external challenges in terms of the fact that we're working with consumer preferences that have been shaped by years and years of our current food system, making salt and added sugars and other kind of nutrients just so ubiquitous. And then of course, there's still the challenge that the way that our product is served in a restaurant may still not be one that's necessarily health promoting. You know, it could be served with a lot of condiments or seasonings or sides. So these challenges are kind of beyond the scope of my role at Impossible Foods to address directly, but they're just important factors to consider when we think of the big picture of how our product and alternative proteins in general are going to play into the food space.
That's so interesting. I'm just so excited for the future of plant-based food industry. Like, as someone that is been meat eater for the most of my life, I really like, you know, like I just cannot wait to see like the foods that I used to eat being in plant-based form so I can eat it again. Thank you, Esther. And this question is for both of you personally. What is your favorite part of working within this industry? Nate, if you can go first, please.
Yeah, I love how it seems that we have a very tractable solution for many problems. So, you know, animal welfare issues, major contributors to climate change, deforestation, and biodiversity loss, zoonotic disease, pandemic creation, like all of these, you know, human malnutrition, all of these major societal issues have, as one of their root causes, at least, animal agriculture. And now we have this extremely promising alternative of alternative proteins that are being pioneered by companies like Impossible Foods. And now everyone else in the food industry and the meat industry is trying to join in on the fun in the business opportunity. And it's just really heartening how fast it's all growing. You know, just in terms of venture capital between 2019 and 2020, the amount of venture capital going into early stage companies across the 3 categories of alternative proteins has doubled in all categories, sometimes even tripled. And so, you know, it's really rapidly growing, but it's still also kind of early enough where pretty much anybody can get involved and make a difference. If you look at, you know, even though venture capital amounts are really growing rapidly, they're still less than, for example, the amount that's going into U.S. cannabis companies. So the entire global alt protein, you know, venture capital investment figure is lower than the 2019 U.S. cannabis venture capital investment figure. So, you know, it's very early, but it's growing very rapidly. So we're kind of, you know, at the beginning of this kind of exponential curve. So I think it's really, really fun.
Great, thank you. Esther, would you please share your thoughts as well?
Yeah, definitely agree with Nate in that it's just an exciting time to be part of this work. But I think my favorite parts of working within the industry is just the fact that it's so impactful. Like I've mentioned, I really believe that food companies have huge potential and responsibility to make positive changes in our food system. So I find the work that I do to be really rewarding and meaningful. And then secondly, I really enjoy being privy to the intricacies of how our food system works and how food companies work. And yeah, being able to kind of help consumers understand where their food comes from. And I think this kind of goes back to just my initial desire to be a dietitian in the first place, to bring this full circle, because I really wanted to be able to help individuals make informed choices about their diets. And I think, working in a food company, I'm able to kind of understand where food comes from at a much deeper level.
Awesome, thank you. So that's all the questions from us. So I'm going to just start reading some from the chat. This one's to Esther from Jesse. So it says there was a public news earlier this year that Impossible is also expanding its product line into plant-based milk and dairy products. Are there any challenges with this expansion, and does it have any effects on Impossible's main products, plant-based meat?
Yeah, let's see. Trying to think of challenges. So yes, we are expanding. I think that was from the start. The goal was not just to have one product. It was to have products that can replace all animal foods. And so that is one thing. But I think that our company has kind of become synonymous with the Impossible Burger, just the one product. So I can kind of see that being a challenge in terms of just helping consumers understand more of the mission, rather than it's just like the Impossible Burger, this like new fun product, but really understanding like why we are expanding in these ways. I think with milk particularly, because there are so many other alternatives out there, I can see that being somewhat of a challenge to convince people to give it a try. But yeah, I think those are kind of two challenges that come to top of mind.
I think people will be very excited about trying an Impossible milk.
Great, thank you. So the next question is for you both. It's a little bit long. Speaking of dispelling misleading notions of alternative protein in developed countries, agriculture and rural areas in developing and modernizing countries like Southeast Asia and China have a lot of cultural connection and historical tradition tied to meat consumption. How do we present alternative protein to them in a way that's more culturally and socially acceptable to these areas that may not be ready to help halt their consumption of meat or adapt their cultural food norms? Is it a slow progression where first world countries adopt alternative protein first, or does it come in the form of a campaign to change sentiments rapidly?
Well, you'll probably have a better response, Esther, but I can get us started here. I think the wonderful thing about alternative proteins is potentially we can create products where we're not asking people to sacrifice their, cultural heritage or like, these family traditions of eating certain products. But we're just, creating the same products that people eat just in different ways. There's looking at like specifically like modernizing economies like in areas of Africa or Southeast Asia, there is a real opportunity to help create. There's not really a tradition necessarily of eating a lot of meat like there is in more developed countries. So we have an opportunity to help kind of. We know that as countries develop and they become more wealthy, they want to eat more meat, but we can help set them up so like the meat that they eat is just from plants, not necessarily from animals. Where meat eating is more culturally ingrained. I guess just my first part would answer that. Like hopefully we can create products that can compete with animals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. So I think just like our base product can be used in so many different ways. It's very versatile. And so I think, showing people that it can be cooked in traditional dishes. And especially I think what's really important is to be culturally sensitive, is to partner with local chefs. And that's kind of been our strategy in the countries that we have entered so far. So most recently we went into Canada, which, is not too different from the US in terms of like eating habits, but we made a point to just really partner with those local chefs that are beloved by the communities that they're part of. And those chefs were able to create dishes that they normally do create anyways, just using our product instead of beef.
Super interesting. This next question's great, I think. So it's for Nate. How much work and funding does it take to create those state of the industry reports? And what does the process look like? Do you have to cold call different brands, or do you just buy data from market research firms?
Yeah, creating the state of the industry reports is certainly a lot of work because we're trying to, those reports try to capture the competitive landscape, the investment landscape and trends, the main scientific updates of the year, the like consumer regulatory updates of the year, and sales data as well. So, luckily GFI, for example, has like 10 plus PhDs on staff that we can lean on for things like, that they're tracking what's happening in terms of science, and they can share those insights with us. When it comes to things like financial data, we'll use a vendor like PitchBook, and then we'll just do our own analysis on that data. Yeah, there's a little bit of not really a lot of cold calling nowadays. It's more like cold LinkedIning. Just generally, if you ever want to get a hold of someone in a professional setting, it's almost always just LinkedIn. Just verifying information, like, is this person actually your co-founder or whatever. Yeah, but it's a big group effort. Probably each report ends up having 15 people involved at some point. So it's certainly not just me. I don't know what we don't really have an exact budget for those reports because it's mostly staff time. We hire a few like freelance designers and things like that, but I'm not exactly sure what the cost would be.
Great, thank you. And as Brittany mentioned previously, we love those reports, so please have it coming. This question is for Esther. So I know that people tend to think of soy as unhealthy or bad for men, and it is an allergen. So is it possible aiming to swap out this ingredient someday?
That's a great question. So the short answer is no. Soy is a really good source of protein. It's one of the few like complete proteins found among plants. And so in terms of kind of competing with beef for protein, which is, what a lot of people eat meat for in terms of nutrition, is for the protein. So it is just so nutritious, and it not only protein, it has, all these other nutrients, iron, fiber, all these other vitamins and minerals. So we're not looking to swap it out at any point for nutrition reasons. In terms of the concerns about health, and you mentioned specifically in men, so that's something that we've looked into. So as part of our work, like I mentioned, we do a ton of research. We've read every single paper out there on soy, and the overwhelming consensus is that soy is safe at high levels of consumption. All of those kind of concerns have been dispelled by the literature, particularly the concern about men's endocrine effects. That concern kind of came out of these two case studies where there was one where a man ate or drank liters of soy milk every day for like 3 years. And so that was just kind of like one case study. The overwhelming majority of the literature has not proven any sort of link between soy milk or soy consumption and endocrine effects, reproductive effects, cancer, anything like that. So we feel pretty confident just based on all of our research that it is a safe and highly nutritious ingredient to use.
Thank you for sharing. I love soy. So it's always relieving to hear an expert say that. So the next question's for both of you, and it is, how has working within this space impacted you or led to your growth?
How has working in this space led to my growth? I mean, obviously in a tremendous way. Like, the kind of interesting thing about alternative proteins is that it's such a young industry. Like, veggie products have been around for a long time, but there's a difference between a veggie burger, for example, and plant-based meat. Plant-based meat, I would argue, did not exist until, Impossible and Beyond launched their first products and decided they're going to create, meat without the animals. And so this kind of whole industry, for the most part, at least the really like technical approaches that companies are taking, is also new. That it's like everyone is just trying to become as knowledgeable as possible. So there's no really like grizzled industry veterans at this point, except maybe someone who's been at Impossible for a decade. So it's been fun just like growing alongside people and trying to keep up with all of the companies that form. Have learned a lot about like, how we can apply collateral industry knowledge. So things like 3D printing technology or tissue engineering technologies, or even like various processing technologies, and how we can find applications for those in alternative proteins has been really fascinating.
Great. And Nate, just to comment on your comment in the chat, that's great that you eat an unbelievable amount of soy and you're doing pretty well, it seems like. Yeah, so I think in terms of how I have grown being in this industry, I think, just in terms of my nutrition career trajectory wise, I think it's really, I went into it a little bit already, but just being able to see things from a systems perspective and see things from just this place where I can have just so much more impact, I think has been huge. And, this isn't nutrition specific, but I think also working in Impossible, we can kind of consider it a startup. It's getting a little big now, but yeah, just working in such an innovative space. Previously I was working in the clinical world, in a hospital where there are just, set protocols for everything. And being at a company like Impossible has really forced me to kind of flex my creative problem solving and innovative thinking muscles, which, was a steep learning curve for me, just coming from where I had come from. But I think I'm really thankful for it.
That's great. I think creativity is very important in everything. And that is amazing. So the last question is to Esther. Is heme genetically engineered and does it need to be labeled as such?
Yeah, so it is considered a genetically modified ingredient. What we do is we take DNA from the soy hemoglobin or gene, and we insert it into a yeast that then ferments it. And that's what allows us to produce the quantities of heme that we need to create our products to meet the demand. So it's a pretty simple process. People get scared with the word genetically modified, but when you lay it out like that, it's, all very simple processes. Nothing is like new in terms of the process. Even the yeast we use is a really common yeast. That's the yeast that's used to brew beer and a lot of other common food products. But yeah, it is required to be labeled. So, and we don't shy away from that. We have spoken publicly about it. We're committed to, responsible genetic modification, and we've been clear about that. And, it's controversial because, people have mixed views on it, but that's kind of our stance on genetic modification.
Thank you. And then actually one last question. So for both of you, so one of the main barriers that consumers face is accessing alt protein products is the cost. What are some strategies that alt protein companies are using to make products more accessible and cost effective, especially since products from animal ag are so subsidized?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if Nate has a better answer than me, but I can speak kind of generally. I think, one thing is scaling. When we started, it was just such a small company that this startup cost is high and all of that. But now that we're able to scale, and that helps certainly. I think also our sourcing team does a really fantastic job of looking at all different sources of all of our ingredients to help kind of drive down costs as well. So that's one strategy. I don't know, Nate, do you have any other?
Yeah, I mean, scaling and sourcing are probably the two biggest. So I totally agree with you. I mean, to be very repetitive here, the plant-based meat as an application area is relatively new, and so there's lots of things to optimize upstream of that. So in terms of like crop optimization, the the ability to get cheap crops that are fit for purpose for alt protein applications is just something that's continuing to be optimized. We're kind of using things that were optimized for animal feed or to be used in other applications, and we're still, working through that. So I think that'll bring prices down, make processing easier. We can unlock things like, whole ingredient applications of crops. So rather than creating extracts or isolates, we're able just to use the whole crops, which would save on cost. And then like in terms of processing technologies, we're kind of most companies are using relatively old processing like technologies, like old extruders that weren't really designed for the applications of today, and we're just going to take some time before those things develop and disperse. So yeah, it is, prices are high now, but they're coming down, and yeah, I think as more and more money and interest goes in the industry, it's going to become more optimistic every day.
Okay, yeah, and with that, we're going to be wrapping up our panel discussion for today. But before we conclude, can you guys say like any few last words of motivation just to wrap things up?
Sure, happy to start here. Yeah, very glad to see that you're all members of this organization. I wish that my school would have had something like this. I think being able to find at least some kind of like thing that you're passionate about or potential industry to enter like while you're still in school is really, really valuable. And even if it's not something that you end up working in, you're going to gain valuable skills, and just to be a part of this kind of community, I think is really great. I will say the industry could use each and every one of you for your unique skills. It's not just scientists involved here, it's literally everyone. We're rebuilding the $2 trillion animal agriculture industry, including all of the supply chain, the distribution chain, everything. So it's really an all hands on deck moment, and we're very glad to have you all working in it.
Yeah, Nate, you took mine. But yeah, just echoing what Nate said, yeah, just really excited to see the interest that's present here in alternative proteins. And yeah, I think just again, I think my encouragement is just to be, mission focused and look at the big picture of how this new industry can benefit the world, but also to really think critically about your own personal mission and what you can contribute. There's just so many pieces that need to work together in order to create these products, and so just understanding what role you really want to play is important. And just as an anecdote, like how I got my job, the position actually didn't exist when I applied. When I was looking around at food companies, I noticed, I was surprised, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but many food companies don't even have nutrition teams, which shocked me. But because I think every food company has to have, a team of nutrition professionals. But yeah, just I say that to say, there are gaps in our food system, and especially in alternative proteins because it's so new. And so just being able to yeah, not be afraid to think outside the box if a role doesn't exist that you think needs to be there, to kind of go after it and kind of create the change that you want to see.
Okay, yeah, big thank you to Nate and Esther for coming out tonight, and everyone else who joined. We really hope like you all learned something from this, and also that it was like, a great break from studying for finals and like stuff like that. And if you guys could share maybe like your contact info, like your email in the chat. So if anyone has like further questions, they could reach out to you guys. I think that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.